Right, after all that sadness, we're now going to have fun. Mr. Derek Shelmerdine sitting opposite me, but I say we're going to have fun. We're talking about tragedy.
That's an ironic introduction.
We're talking about tragedy in music. Anyway, let's start from the beginning. Derek, lovely to see you, as always. Welcome to Meridian, as always. Great that you're back for your monthly stint. How's things?
Oh,
hang on, let me just get you going a bit more. Try that.
I've been looking forward to coming and chatting again, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we are going to have fun, but in a sad kind of way, because we thought we'd look at some of the tragedies that have beset rock and roll and purveyors of rock and roll over the years. And a good place to obviously start would be Buddy Holly. I mean, the day the music died.
Yeah, the famous plane crash.
Absolutely. Just about anybody with the remotest passing interest in rock and roll music will know that Buddy Holly and several others died on the 3rd of February 1959. Now, by a wonderful coincidence, the reason that he was actually on this tour of the American Midwest in midwinter was because of problems dating right back to when he signed his contract with Coral, and that was on the 16th of May 57, a couple of years earlier. And we'll be talking about that in the second session, the Rock and Roll Hour. So the background to this will all come out. But what happened is, by the time that we now get to the winter of 1959, Buddy Holly was desperately in need of money and agreed to go. He'd split up from the Crickets by now. And he had Waylon Jennings, actually, as his bass guitarist on this particular tour. And he undertook a tour of the Midwest. That's the sort of Fargo kind of area. Now, anybody who's ever been to that part of the world knows it is very flat and very, very cold. It's said you can throw up in midwinter, you can throw up a hot cup of coffee and it will freeze before it hits the ground. And I think that is probably a true story. You get some feel for this because one of the reasons...
Any Americans listening in that area, please email in studio@meridianfm.com and tell us if that's just an old wives' tale
absolutely.
Or it is true. We'd love to know. We really would. Actually, if it is just a wives' tale, just pretend it's real because it's great. It's great.
It's true. If there are any Great Plains employees who are now Microsoft employees in Fargo, North Dakota, which was the headquarters of Great Plains, please ring in, say hi. But what happened, to give a feel for it, the tour bus was very cold, kept breaking down. The drummer of Buddy Holly's band at this time was actually in hospital. The reason he wasn't on that plane was he had frostbite, and he'd been hospitalised a couple of days before the crash. So that gives you some sort of kind of feel as to how cold it was.
Good having frostbite when you're a drummer, is it? Well, I guess any musician, but...
Yeah. It must have been mild frostbite because he was only in hospital a few days.
Right.
And he did play then. He came back and joined the tour and finished the tour. But it's not a good thing to have. But the band itself, Waylon Jennings and Tommy Alsop, was supposed to travel on the plane with Buddy Holly. But Tommy Alsop lost the flip of a coin to Richie Havens.
I bet he kept that coin.
Ooh, absolutely. So Richie Havens took his place on the plane. And the big bopper, who was quite a star at the time, Chantilly Lace and all that, he took Waylon Jennings' place. And, of course, the plane crashed in bad weather. It's an ill wind, as they say. And when word went up in Fargo, because they were flying to Fargo because they were playing in Moorhead the following day, and word went up in Fargo that they died, and they needed an act to replace him that day before they could get the replacement acts in. And Bobby V, a 16-year-old Bobby V, and his backing group, The Shadows, stepped into the breach, and this actually kick-started Bobby V's career. And then Dion and Frankie Sardo carried on with the tour, and the new headliners, Jimmy Clanton and Fabian and Frankie Avalon, two teenage heartthrobs, joined in to replace Buddy Holly. So you can see there's a microcosm there of how rock and roll was changing, because I've spoken before about how really the golden age of rock and roll came to an end by about 1959. And the new face of rock and roll was very much the clean-cut teen idols like Fabian and Frankie Avalon. But that was again, flip of a coin, and your destiny is sealed.
I wonder if he did keep it and he drilled a hole in it and he sort of hung it in a chain round his neck.
Well, it would be good to think that coin still existed.
It would indeed. God, dear.
Now, the other, or the next interesting aspect is the macabre 27 Club. The number of musicians who've died at the age of 27 is really quite uncanny. In delving into the history of this, I find that there are members of the 27 Club dating back really to the beginning of the 20th century, jazz players and the like. But I wonder whether some of these players who died at 27 are then referred to as members of the 27 Club, because then it had become a phenomenon. Because I like to think that the 27 Club started with Robert Johnson, who was murdered by, apparently, urban legend has it, by a jealous husband on the 16th of August.
But do you know something? I can believe that.
Oh, apparently he was quite a lad.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
I can believe it.
But he's reputed to have sold his soul to the devil at the Crossroads, hence the Crossroads song that he sang about. But it is interesting. You read reports at the time of how he was an average. I mean, that part of the world at that time had an awful lot of blues guitarists, singers, harmonica players, and apparently he was one of a good one. And then suddenly he seemed to be the genius. So who knows? Maybe the story of Faust does lean itself across into rock and roll. But other members, I mean, famous ones, people like Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, he drowned in his own swimming pool, 3rd of July, 1969. Jimi Hendrix choked on his own vomit, not too pleasant, 18th of September 1970. Followed by Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Rudy Lewis, lead singer, one of the lead singers with the Drifters, Pete Ham, we'll talk about a little later, from Badfinger, and Jesse Belvin, who, if that name doesn't ring too many bells, he's back from the doo-wop years. And he was the co-writer of the Penguins' Earth Angel. Now, if you're a collector of these things, I did check the value, because it has been said to be one of the most expensive UK singles ever released. And if you've got the London American silver lettering, that's only 500 quid. If you've got the London American tri-centre gold lettering, that'll set you back 1,750 pounds for a near mint copy.
I think I'll have to delve through the old 45s when I get in.
Well worth checking out.
I think I can probably guess that it's not there.
Absolutely. But you never know.
You never know.
You never know.
You never know.
I mean, car boots, you do have stories of very collectible stuff appearing in car boots, although you need to be up very early before.
Well, I guess because most people would just look at it and just think, oh, that old thing, I don't even like that record, and off it goes. You know, it could go anywhere. I mean, the famous one, of course, is the Freddie Mercury when he was Larry Lurex, and or I don't know, he or somebody, the record, this kind of no hoper guy is supposed to have chucked about, I don't know, a couple of hundred of these Larry Lurex singles straight into a skip.
Dear me.
And I think somebody did pull them out. I guess they're around somewhere. Again, yeah. I haven't got one.
No, that's another one that's well worth hunting out. But we just mentioned Pete Ham of Badfinger. And Badfinger, I mean, that could warrant a whole story of its own. I mean, really interesting band. Called themselves the Ivies originally. One of the reasons they changed the name was because they didn't want to get confused with the Ivy League. But they famously were picked up by Apple, the Beatles record label. And that proved to be a very two-edged sword in terms of when they were in America particularly. The people all seemed to be more interested in talking to them about their relationship with the Beatles than they were talking to them about their own particular records. But again, famously, their manager, it's not even urban legend, ripped them off mercilessly. They moved to CBS, had problems there. They actually are responsible for the last single in the UK ever released on Apple, My Eye, coupled with Blind Owl. Apple 49 for any collectors out there. But Pete Ham, one of the original guys who set the group up, singer-guitarist. He committed suicide on the 24th of April 1975. He hanged himself in his garage, his own garage. And then, getting on for 10 years later, this had all hung very heavily on Tom Evans. Again, he was one of the originals. He was the bass player. And on the 19th of November 1983, he hanged himself as well from a tree in his garden. I mean, all in all, I mean, they want, when you read about these guys, just about all of the reviews suggest that they should have been really, really big, but they never really quite
because, I mean, they wrote some wonderful songs, didn't they? Really songs.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the obvious one? Without You, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Nielsen, which, everyone thinks is a Nielsen track, but of course
it's theirs, yeah.
Yeah, it's theirs.
They had, I think, about 3 hit singles themselves in the UK, but nothing very spectacular. But I think some of the stranger things that have happened, a couple of sort of gunshot incidents. The first one that's often thought of maybe the first casualty in rock and roll, 25th of December, or Happy Christmas Johnny Ace, 1954. He was playing in in Houston, in Texas, at a gig with Big Mama Thornton, who had the original version of Hound Dog. And he was playing Russian roulette backstage, and he came second. It didn't work out well for him. But I think...
Because you just annoyed he came second, was he? Well, he wanted to win.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like all athletes, second is the first loser.
Second's no good.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost a metaphor for life, really. If you don't win, life gets very tricky very quickly. But I think a sadder one, really, was Terry Kath, one of the founding members of Chicago, when they called themselves Chicago Transit Authority. He also died of a gunshot wound when he was just 31. But he accidentally shot himself. He put the gun to his head as he did, like De Niro does in Taxi Driver, pulled the trigger, and there was one in the spout, as they say, and he killed himself. He had no idea.
Because he actually thought that he looked at the chamber and thought, oh, it's empty, it's okay. But he didn't realise it was ready and it was primed and ready to go.
Absolutely.
He didn't realise that, did he?
Which is, now that is
sad.
Tragedy. But I thought it'd be nice to hear from Chicago Transit Authority's first album, I'm a Man.
Now, if you're going to end a record, that is the way to end the record, isn't it?
That is a brilliant track.
It's just wonderful, isn't it? 1969, absolutely fantastic.
Cover of Spencer Davis, original co-written by Stevie Winwood.
Fantastic.
But that is a brilliant, absolutely brilliant version.
Absolutely wonderful. In case you're wondering what you're listening to, my guest tonight is the wonderful Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, my music historian. Derek, I used to call you, when I was talking to people, I used to call you my musical historian, thinking you'd come in here and start singing everything, but of course you don't. He's a very good drummer, I might add, but I don't know, I've never heard him sing. Mr. Derek Shelmerdine is my music historian, and tonight we're doing the tragedies that have occurred in rock and roll over the last 50, 60 years or so.
Yeah. I mean, it's had its fair share. I mean, you look at the Who, and about 6 months after Kenny Jones replaced Keith Moon, 1979, December the 3rd, they were playing a concert in Cincinnati, and at that time, for that particular concert, the seats weren't reserved. So you can imagine now, I mean, the Who were very, very big. And when the doors opened, the stampede for unreserved seats left 11 people crushed to death. So not good. They called that in America, they call that festival seating. And a lot of venues reviewed the whole concept of festival seating, i.e. Making sure that certainly the good seats were all reserved, so that people had plenty of time to get to them.
So, I mean, it was literally a first-come, first-served type attitude then,
Absolutely. It was, on your starting blocks, ready, steady, go, and everybody then would just hurtle themselves to the front. Thousands of, I mean,
of course, the outside gigs that you get now, like the ones you see in football stadiums, like there's the film of everybody going into when Live Aid opened. I don't know if you've seen it, and literally everybody is charging like crazy just to get to the front. I mean, thankfully nobody got hurt in those days, but I guess it doesn't happen too much now, does it?
No, I think that was quite a rare occurrence, but 11 people.
Yes, pretty bad.
I think one of the problem probably has is like a domino effect. I guess if somebody stumbles, brings somebody else down, and then you've got, like Hillsborough, you've got like, loads of people surging forward, and you can't not surge forward because you're just being pushed from behind. So even if you can see that are problems, you actually can't do anything about it. And then I guess as people are trying to avoid the people who fall, and they fall, and the whole thing would just have a cumulative effect. But various concert venues reviewed the whole thing of festival seating after that. But I think probably the most famous of the festival concert gigs that ended in tragedy was Altamont, the end of the Rolling Stones 1969 tour. It wasn't technically part of the tour. They decided this is 1969 and things were free. People like to put on free concerts. This is the age of the hippie Woodstock.
I think they should carry on doing free concerts. I'm all for that. I like a bit of free.
Yeah, I think £400 for a ticket.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
Is probably not really what you want to do. By the time you've got a hot dog, it's going to cost you nearly 401, isn't it?
Oh dear.
But 6th of December 1969. And what had happened is the Stones had used Hell's Angels in their free concert at Hyde Park that particular summer, and it had gone quite well. But I think they didn't really quite realise that San Francisco and Hell's Angels aren't really the same cup of tea, as it were, as Finsbury Park, Islington, Hell's Angels. And things really went from bad to worse. Jefferson Airplane's Marty Balin was KO'd by one of them at one point. Grateful Dead actually dropped out of the... They were due to play, but the escalating violence during the day saw Grateful Dead decide that discretion, better part of valor, we're out of here, boys. And what happened was, by the time that the headliners, the Stones, came on, there was a sort of kerfuffle near the front of the stage, and a guy called Meredith Hunter appeared to pull out a gun, and a Hell's Angel called Alan Passaro leapt on him and stabbed him to death. Now, there's a very interesting sort of documentary film that was being made of the gig called Gimme Shelter, and in that you can, clearly see, it's all in the shadows, but it looks quite clear, and the courts cleared Passaro as operating in self-defense. So the courts obviously believe that Meredith Hunter was holding a gun, and he's right in front of the stage.
I remember seeing the Gimme Shelter film at of all places, the Hammy Odeon.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because they do occasionally show films there. But that's where I went to see it. It was great, really good. About 72, something like that. I think it came out 71, 72. Yeah.
Oh, it really captures it.
Yeah.
I mean, other people who played that day were Santana, Jefferson Airplane, well, obviously Marty Balin, and the Flying Burrito Brothers, who I actually personally love. And Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young were there. But car crashes seem to also be one of the ways that rock and roll heroes have shuffled off this mortal coil. In 1960, Eddie Cochran died in a car crash. He'd been touring the UK with Gene Vincent, and they just played a week-long residency gig in Bristol at the Hippodrome, and he was keen to get back to America after I think the tour was about 3 months, I think, and they had a taxi, and there was Gene Vincent and Sharon Shealy, Eddie Cochran's girlfriend, in the car as well, and it crashed. The driver's name was George Martin, spookily enough. He was later sentenced to dangerous driving, 6-month sentence, but 15-year ban. And Eddie Cochran died in hospital that same night. But one of the interesting things was that a young police cadet by the name of Dave Harmon attended the scene, and he decided at some point shortly after that the police wasn't for him. He changed his name to Dave D and fronted the legendary Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch. Now there's a rock and roll name to conjure with.
Very brave when you think about it, taking a name like that, because there was nothing around. Nobody would take it, because it almost sounded comical, but they weren't a comical band, were they? They actually produced some good stuff, didn't they? Xanadu with the old whip and all that live.
Absolutely.
They actually produced some nice, it's what I call kind of upper-class pop music.
It was very much at the harder edge of pop. I mean, the first singles, I mean, Hold Tight, I think, was, if it wasn't their first, it was certainly one of the early ones. It was a good, very Dave Clark 5 pounding drum beat. No, they were good. They had a string of hits across half the 60s. But tragically, another star, Johnny Kidd, was killed in a car crash. His was really unlucky because basically they had a gig. They were doing a tour of the north of England. They had a gig in Bolton, but they were late, and they arrived at and offered to the promoter to actually play the gig for free rather than cancel it, but the promoter decided to cancel it. So they actually drove off. So in a way, they should never have been where they were at the time where they were there. And they had a head-on collision with another car, and he was killed. Now, also in the car was Nick Simper, who was one of the New Pirates, because Johnny Kidd's band had become the New Pirates for various reasons, and they did carry on as the New Pirates after Johnny Kidd's death for a while. But Nick Simper, of course, went on to be one of the founding members of Deep Purple. So you actually find when you go back to a lot of these early 60s bands, names pop up while they were serving their apprenticeship, as it were. I
wonder, Derek, I know you've written your book and everything, but perhaps you ought to do a kind of a rock family tree, not necessarily by genetics, but by groups and by record labels, etc. And I bet you'd be amazed how many actually link together, and you can trace one back to the other, and they split off and form this group, etc., etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you've got, I know it took you 7 years to do the first book. If you can do the next family tree book in sort of another 7 years, then that would be good.
I mean, one of the things I did do with the first one in Rock'n'Roll Unravelled, in the histories, where you've got a lineup. Have a look at where somebody come from, where they'd gone to. It's really fascinating to see how that all develops. A couple of people who had narrow escapes in car crashes was the drummer for Def Leppard. I mean, narrow escape, he lost his arm, but the band stood by him, and he came back with a custom-built kit. And about 3 years after the crash, they released their album Hysteria. And in 1998, that went 12 platinum. So that went well. And Sandy Nelson, the first drum hero, had hit singles with things like Let There Be Drums and Teen Beat, and actually played on the Teddy Bears, Phil Spector's first ever single, To Know Him Is to Love Him. He lost the lower part of his leg in a motorcycle accident. But again, he modified his playing style and was back. But I think one of the most bizarre coincidences of deaths in rock and roll would have to be the Allman Brothers Band. I mean, Dwayne Allman, on the 29th of October 1971, he died in a motorcycle accident at the age of 24 in Macon, Georgia, when he swerved to avoid a trailer tractor. And almost exactly a year later, Berry Oakley, the bass player from the band, on the November the 11th, 72, he died just a couple of blocks from where Dwayne Allman had died just a year earlier.
He's also on a motorbike, wasn't he?
On a motorbike as well. Yeah. I mean, he was 24, which is the reason I mentioned his age before. Yeah. I mean, 2 blocks away, they were both the same age, both died on
he wasn't swerving to avoid a trailer, was he?
No, he wasn't, but one of the... and the last album to feature Dwayne was Eat a Peach. And not all of the tracks feature him, but I think there were 4 or 5 tracks on the album that were him. An urban legend has it that it was called Eat a Peach because he'd hit a peach truck, but apparently that wasn't true. In an interview with Ellen Mandel in Good Times magazine in 1971, she asked him, how are you helping the revolution? Remember, this is 1971. And he said, every time I'm in Georgia, I eat a peach for peace. Wow, that apparently is the origin. Brilliant. And I thought, ain't wasting time no more from said album.
The wonderful voice there of Greg Allman, the Allman Brothers Band, but Dwayne Allman obviously on the old slidey guitar as well. Oh. Wonderful stuff there, and ain't wasting time no more. This is me, Dave Rips, on this side of the desk. The other side of the desk, it's our monthly guest, our music historian, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine. If you'd like to get in touch, you can ask Derek a question, actually, if you want, because he will be back again after the 10 o'clock news with his what happened on this day over the years. Email studio@meridianfm.com. I'm sure Derek will have the answer.
We'll have a go. Lynyrd Skynyrd. There's another band that famously died in a plane crash.
I think, along with Buddy Holly, I think the kind of Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash is probably the most well known. Would you say?
Absolutely, yeah, very much so. Yeah. I mean, three of the band died: Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, and Steve Gaines' sister. Actually, you don't hear much about. Cassie Gaines also died, along with the pilot and road manager. They apparently ran out of fuel. As simple as that. That seems to be the story that comes out. But one of the things that's really quite spooky about that was that they were on tour promoting their new album, Street Survivors. They'd only been out for a few weeks. And if you look at the album, you'll see the original album has them standing in a street, high buildings, all burning. And after the plane crash, the record label withdrew the album, and it was re-released with the same picture of the group members standing, but against just a completely black background. So if you've got a copy of Street Survivors, check out whether it's the black or the burning buildings version, or both. Some people like to have all versions of everything. Yes. Completists.
Because they just weren't a lucky band after that, were they? I think, didn't they have one of them then who survived the plane crash?
He survived the plane, I forget his name now, but he survived the plane crash and then died seriously injured him, put himself in a wheelchair with a drunk driving incident. Right. And what happened was 10 years later, the band got together and decided to do a reunion tour, and this is some of the originals, some new people, and Charlie Daniels was part of that band. If you remember The Devil Goes Down to Georgia fame, and two of the wives actually sued them because they said that the band would never, the remaining members would never capitalise on the band, but that was all settled happily. And what started out as just the 10th anniversary salute to the band tour was proved to be so popular that they carried on and picked up where they'd left off, as it were. Lynyrd Skynyrd is still touring today, as far as I know. Great band. I mean, Tuesday's Gone, I think, is probably my favourite track. I'm a bit of a Lynyrd Skynyrd fan, really. But they started out, their first album didn't get released until the plane crash. They spent about a year in the studio in Muscle Shoals. Cutting tracks with loads of different people going through the ranks. And I think it was MCA, the label, and decided it wasn't good enough to put out. So I think it came out as first and last after the crash. But of course, John Lennon, 8th of December 1980, famously murdered outside his own home in New York, the Dakota building. I mean, that very morning, Annie Leibovitz, a very famous photographer, had been shooting John and Yoko. That afternoon, he was in the studio working on Walking on Thin Ice, Yoko Ono's new single. Pops home, bag of chips, and watched the telly, and unfortunately is shot to death outside his house. Tragedy. Bit stranger ones, really, suicide pacts. I mean, may have been more, but there are two well worth thinking about. One was a Judas Priest album called Stained Glass, and two American teenagers, Raymond Belknap and James Vance, made a pact to kill themselves with a shotgun, and they carried it out. Belknap actually succeeded, but James Vance only succeeded in blowing the front of his face off. So that's his parents then decided that what they'd do, they'd sue CBS, the record label, and Judas Priest. And what they did, they singled out a track called Better by You, Better Than Me, an old Spooky Truth track from their Spooky 2 album, written by Gary Wright. And they claimed there was a subliminal message to do it, do it, do it. Anyway, 5 years later, the courts decided that there was no do it anywhere, and they lost that particular case. But that was around the 85 mark. And back in 1980, Ozzy Osbourne was recording his first album after splitting with Black Sabbath, guitarist Randy Rhoads, and they were recording the Blizzard of Oz. And there was a track called Suicide Solution that was written by Osbourne and Rhoads. And again, a teenager decided that he'd kill himself after listening to, it was actually quite a bunch of Ozzy Osbourne albums. But, I mean, he succeeded. And once again, the writers, and CBS was the same record label. I don't know if there's something about CBS, the way they cut their vinyl, but they do pop up in at least both of these suicide tracks. But they lost as well, the parents, when they sued them. But Randy Rhoads, who we were just saying was the guitarist on this, and he joined Ozzy Osbourne when he put his own band together. And Ozzy Osbourne was on tour, and they'd stopped off to see a mate. And Randy Rhoads decided that he'd go for a spin in a light aircraft, and for a prank, they decided to buzz the Ozzy Osbourne's tour bus. But sadly, the pilot made a minor misjudgment and must have clipped either the van or the road or a building, and the plane crashed, and they were all killed. So it's, the moral of the story is, if you're in small planes, don't go buzzing tour buses. But I think one of the real tragedies really was Roy Orbison. One of the true greats, but he on the 6th of June 1966, he had what was very much the first of a double family tragedy. His wife Claudette died in a motorcycle accident in Tennessee when her bike was hit by a truck. Back in the day, shortly after he'd married Claudette, he wrote the track Claudette that the Everly Brothers released as the B-side to All I Have to Do Is Dream, hit single for them back in 1958. But they actually divorced in 1964 and then remarried again shortly afterwards. So Roy Orbison hadn't really been back long with Claudette when the tragedy occurred, but it wasn't over for him. Because shortly afterwards, in 1982, two of his three sons died in a fire at his home in Tennessee. So I mean, that how unlucky can one guy be?
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
just dreadful.
I mean, it's, especially when you look at he'd written that song just after they got married, and marriage didn't work out. Then they got back together, and then it happened.
The tragedies of rock and roll, eh?
Yeah.
Derek, it's been absolutely fantastic as usual. You will be back again after the 10 o'clock news with It Happened on This Day throughout the years.
Absolutely.
And no doubt there'll be some stonking great stories in that as well, won't there? But taking us up to, I don't know, 9-ish, no news. I'm glad to say, hate the news. I don't need the news, but it's not working. I would play it normally, but it's just not there. Sky have let us down yet again. This is Roy Orbison and Claudette.